"Myron, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position," my boss said flatly as he stared at the edge of his desk. "Clean out your desk by the end of the day." I didn't argue, didn't ask for an explanation. I just stood, nodded once, and walked out of his office with the dignity they never bothered to protect. My name is Myron Lane. I'm 54 years old, and until that Monday morning, I was Senior Systems Analyst at Helix Point Technologies in Columbus, Ohio. For nearly 2 decades, I had been the silent engine of the company, building, maintaining, protecting, and never once demanding recognition. I wasn't the flashiest, but I was the one who kept the whole damn place from falling apart. Amanda from HR was seated beside Daniel during the meeting, her eyes flicking from the table to her clipboard, like she was watching a storm form in slow motion. She didn't offer a handshake or a farewell, just paperwork and protocol. That was all I amounted to after 17 years, a checklist and an exit code. They thought they were ending a job, but they were provoking a reckoning. Back at my desk, the light flickered overhead like it always did, a little too dim and a little too late to fix. I reached for my mug, the one my son had painted in high school, chipped at the rim but still standing strong like me. My hands moved slowly as I packed, like I was measuring the weight of each item against the time I'd given away. Every photo, every sticky note, every keystroke had been a thread in a fabric they were now tearing apart. The younger engineers tried not to look directly at me. A few offered nods, unsure of whether to say something or stay silent. Most of them didn't know that I'd trained their trainers, that I'd written the systems they assumed came out of thin air. They knew how to deploy apps, but they didn't know what lived underneath. I'd built custom diagnostics when the off-the-shelf tools failed. I'd saved the company from a ransomware breach in 2016 with a recovery protocol I'd written at 2 a.m. on my daughter's birthday, and I did it all without ever asking for a promotion, a raise, or even a thank you, because I believed that loyalty was a form of leadership, even if no one else did. Bethany from marketing approached with cautious steps and damp eyes. "Myron, I just heard," she said, voice trembling. "This doesn't make sense. You practically built this place." I nodded once, unsure if I should thank her or apologize for still existing. "It's okay," I lied. "Companies evolve." But in my mind, something snapped, something old, patient, and long underestimated. It wasn't rage. It was precision. As I left the office for the last time, Daniel stood by the hallway like a security guard, not a leader. No handshake. No thank you. Just a pair of eyes making sure the door hit me on the way out. They thought they were cutting out fat. But I wasn't fat, I was bone. And you don't realize how much you needed it until the body collapses. The security badge they took back had been reissued 16 times. It had history. It had memory. Just like I did. Driving home, the city looked different through the windshield. It wasn't just glass between me and the world, it was clarity. I wasn't afraid. I was awake. They'd taken something from me, but they'd also given me something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. I joined Helix Point back when it was 2 rented floors in a strip mall. Back when my daughter Alyssa was still learning to tie her shoes. Now she was defending her PhD dissertation while the company tried to erase the man who kept its digital heart beating. Tina, my wife, always joked the servers were my second family. I suppose they treated me more loyally too. When Daniel arrived 5 years ago, he called our department technical assets. We were no longer people, we were overhead. He said the future was leaner, faster, cleaner. I knew that meant erasing the past. He brought in Jason Romer, a consultant with smooth talk and sharper teeth. Jason spoke in circles so elegant you didn't realize you'd been insulted until hours later. He pitched ideas like platform overhaul and zero-trust culture to a board that didn't understand them. And one day, quietly, my name started disappearing from meetings. I noticed when my administrative privileges were reduced. Not enough to alarm anyone, just enough to push me into the background. They thought I wouldn't notice. They forgot who trained the system to begin with. Tina noticed my distraction long before I admitted anything. On the porch one night, she handed me a beer and asked, "Are they finally pushing you out?" I laughed without smiling. "They're trying. Let's see how far they get." 3 weeks before they fired me, I found a memo that wasn't meant for my eyes. It was a restructure plan. My title wasn't on it. My responsibilities were listed under Jason. That same day, I ran a routine security audit, a task no one else bothered with anymore. Buried in the logs were recurring payments to a vendor I'd never seen before, Northbridge Consulting Group. The address led to a UPS box. The payment amounts were growing quietly like weeds in a forgotten garden. I dug deeper. The transaction approvals came from Brandon Shaw, our CFO. A quick cross-check revealed that Northbridge was registered to someone named Tyler Shaw, Brandon's brother. The pieces clicked. They weren't just streamlining, they were cleaning house to hide the smell. Millions were being funneled out under the disguise of consulting. Legal on paper, rotten in practice. And now they thought they had removed the only person who could trace it back. That evening, Tina handed me a fresh cup of coffee without saying a word. I sat down at my home desk and opened the drawer only I had the key to. Inside were the drives encrypted, off-site, and packed with quiet truths. They thought I'd disappear quietly. I was about to become the loudest silence they ever heard. Wednesday morning, I sat in my car across the street from Helix Point's headquarters with my laptop open on the passenger seat. I wasn't there to protest or beg for my job, I was there to observe. To play the long game. The one they never saw coming. At exactly 9:15 a.m., I sent an email to Daniel using a mirrored Helix Point address I'd created years ago for phishing tests. The subject line read, "Urgent financial irregularities in vendor payments, please advise." I included just enough detail to rattle him some payment dates, vendor IDs, and voice ranges. But I left out the biggest part, the connection to Brandon Shaw's brother. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a call from Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tight. "Panicked, Myron. We need to talk immediately about this message. Please call me back." I closed the laptop, packed up, and drove to a small coffee shop 10 minutes away. I took the corner booth, ordered black coffee, and connected to Wi-Fi. At 10:30, another email appeared, this time from Amanda in HR. "Mr. Lane, we have received unauthorized communication from you that potentially violates your severance and confidentiality obligations. Please cease contact with Helix Point employees." Their first instinct wasn't curiosity, it was legal intimidation. I chuckled quietly to myself. I hadn't signed any severance agreement. They hadn't offered one. They assumed I would go away quietly because I always had before. But this time, the story was mine to write. At noon, I visited my bank and accessed a safe deposit box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were hard copies, backup drives, and access logs, evidence no internal cleanup could erase, including admin requests from Brandon months before the fake consulting company had ever received a dime. I took what I needed, locked the rest, and drove home through the first light snow of the season. When I got back, Tina had already left a sandwich and a handwritten note by the door. "Whatever you're planning, do it right." I smiled. She always knew when I wasn't done. I opened the files again and began building a timeline. Dates, payments, approvals, vendor registration records. Then I started on the deeper connection communications between Brandon and Jason Romer. Emails where modernization was code for redirection, where efficiency really meant obfuscation. And Daniel? He wasn't just complicit. He was part of the infrastructure. Late that night, I scheduled an email to all board members using a private server I'd built for audit simulations. The message was simple: before you approve Q4 bonuses tomorrow, please read the attached report. Attached were 34 pages of summaries, logs, and a cross-index linking every dollar to a name. There was no accusation, only truth. Thursday morning, I didn't rush. I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee and watched frost melt off the neighbor's fence. At 8 a.m. sharp, the email was delivered. At 8:17, my phone began buzzing with numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer a single one. By 9, the emergency board session had started. I pictured Robert Chun, a board member I respected, leaning back in his leather chair with the report printed and highlighted. I imagined Brandon's pulse quickening, Daniel's denial forming behind clenched teeth, and Jason trying to look uninvolved. But the paper trail didn't lie. At 9:34, I received a text from Eli, a junior sysadmin I used to mentor. "What did you do?" "Police just showed up." Brandon and Daniel pulled into separate rooms. "Jason looks like he's going to throw up." I didn't reply. Eli didn't need an answer. He already knew. At 10:02, I received a call from Helix Point's general counsel. I answered this one. "Mr. Lane, this is Melanie from legal. The board has reviewed your documents and would like to meet immediately." "I'm available by phone," I said. Her voice tightened. "We'd prefer in person." "No, thank you," I replied. "Everything I know is in the report. That's all I have to say." I closed the call and sat back in my chair. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice for every overlooked employee who gave their life to a company that treated them like a placeholder. At 11:45, Tina walked in from the grocery store with a brown paper bag. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked without even looking at me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That afternoon, news broke on local business outlets. Executive shakeup at Helix Point Technologies amid internal audit. Names weren't listed yet, but by Monday they would be. By 3 p.m., I'd received 4 job offers, 2 from former competitors, 1 from a cybersecurity firm I once helped recover from a breach, and 1 from a startup where a former protege of mine was now CTO. I didn't say yes to any of them. Not yet. There was one last call I needed to make. I dialed Robert Chen's number. He answered on the second ring. "Myron," he said, "I had a feeling this came from you. You still on the board?" I asked. "For now," he said. "After this morning, that might change." "I don't want my old job back," I told him. "I know," he said. "I've already asked the board to consider creating a new position, Chief Information Security Officer, independent. Direct line to us." I paused. "I'll think about it." "You saved the company from rot," Robert said. "You didn't just stop the bleeding, you exposed the infection." "All I did was notice what others ignored," I said, "and write it down." Friday morning was cold, but my nerves were steady as I adjusted my tie in the mirror. I hadn't worn a suit in years, but it still fit just barely. This wasn't about fashion. It was about walking back into the fire that tried to burn me out. The security guard at Helix Point looked up from his desk, eyes widening as he recognized me. "Mr. Lane," he said, almost tripping over his own voice. "You're expected." I gave a small nod, watching him fumble while printing a visitor badge with my name on it. It was a strange thing being welcomed into a place that had once shown you the door. I stepped into the elevator, alone with my reflection in the brushed steel walls. The higher I went, the calmer I felt. Revenge doesn't burn, it sharpens. I had never stepped foot on the executive floor. It always seemed like a different world, one built on numbers and narratives instead of systems and syntax. But now I was part of the story whether they liked it or not. And this time I was holding the pen. The conference room doors opened to a long table surrounded by 10 board members. Robert Chen offered a respectful nod. The interim CEO, Miranda Steele, stood as I entered. "Mr. Lane," she began, "thank you for joining us on such short notice." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I sat at the far end, opened my folder, and looked each of them in the eye. "I assume you've reviewed the materials I sent." Miranda nodded, her voice slightly tense. "Yes, and we're disturbed." Robert leaned forward. "What you uncovered is serious, and it's confirmed by our own audit. So far, we've tracked over $5.2 million in fraudulent activity across 3 shell companies. Executive access logs and approvals match your timeline exactly. It's clear now Brandon, Daniel, and Jason orchestrated the entire thing." I leaned back slightly, letting that acknowledgement land. You had the rot growing beneath your foundation for years. No one noticed because the systems were built to protect you. But you didn't protect the systems. That was always me. Miranda glanced at Robert, then spoke carefully. "We want to fix that. The board has voted to create a new executive position, Chief Information Security Officer. It will report directly to us, no intermediaries. We're offering it to you." I opened my folder and slid across a 1-page document. "Here are my terms. Independent audit authority across every department. Full access to infrastructure, including archived logs and private contractor evaluations, and an untouchable budget." Miranda raised an eyebrow. "That's highly unusual. So is losing millions under your nose," I replied. "You hired consultants to cut costs but ended up cutting oversight. This is how you make sure that never happens again." The board asked for a moment to deliberate privately. I stepped out of the room and stood by the window, watching employees walk through the lobby like nothing had changed. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been invisible for years until I stopped asking for permission. 10 minutes later, Robert opened the door. "We accept every term. You'll start Monday. We want you to rebuild not just our systems but our trust. Can we count on you, Myron?" I looked around the room one last time before answering. "You can count on the truth," I said. "I won't tell you what you want to hear, but I'll always show you what you need to see. That's the job, right?" That afternoon, I returned to the IT floor. It was like walking into a time capsule, Except this time, people didn't pretend I didn't exist. My team looked up unsure if I was a ghost or a warning. I smiled. Let's talk. I called a meeting, not a command, just an invitation. Eli sat near the front, looking nervous. I pointed at him and said, "Eli's your new team lead. I trust him. You should too." There were murmurs, then applause. I could see the relief in their eyes. Someone who understood what they did was finally in charge. "I'm not here to micromanage," I told them. "I'm here to make sure no one ever steals from us again, not money, not credit, not purpose." Later, I walked the corridors past empty offices that once belonged to Daniel and Jason. Their names had been stripped from the doors, their legacy wiped clean. Brandon's office was sealed under legal hold. It felt like walking through a battlefield after the smoke cleared. A few employees caught my eye, nodded, or gave quiet thumbs up. Some had avoided me for years, thinking I was just another dinosaur waiting to be replaced. Now they saw me for what I had always been: solid, stable, and unshakable. Not flashy, just necessary. That evening, Tina and I had dinner at a quiet Italian place we used to visit when times were simpler. She raised her glass. "To getting the last word?" she asked. I smirked. "No, to writing the next chapter." Back home, I sat in my new home office, the one I finally allowed myself to build, and opened my email. Offers were still pouring in from firms who heard what happened. Startups, Fortune 500s, even federal agencies. But I wasn't chasing prestige. I had found something better. I had earned control over my work, my principles, and the future of the people who once looked up to me, and I wasn't letting it go. The next day, a formal press release named me as Helix Point's first ever CISO. Industry blogs lit up with speculation. Some called me the quiet architect. Others just called it the biggest internal cleanup of the decade. I didn't care what they called it as long as they knew someone was finally watching. 3 months later, the sun rose over a very different Helix Point Technologies. The headlines had calmed, the investigations wrapped, and the office halls no longer buzzed with paranoia. Still, I walked into work every morning like it was day one, focused, alert, unshaken. My badge now opened every door, not just physically, but symbolically. As Chief Information Security Officer, I had transformed from ghost to guardian. I didn't hover, didn't bark orders. I built firewalls in people's systems and culture. One protected data, the other protected dignity. Eli was thriving as team lead, and the rest of the department had followed his pace. They worked smarter, more confidently because they felt seen. And with every team huddle, every code review, they remembered what leadership without fear looked like. That was the foundation I wanted to leave behind, not just security, but stability. Tina and I spent more evenings together now, walking our neighborhood, talking about things other than breaches and betrayal. Alyssa came home from grad school that summer, eyes wide with curiosity about the storm I'd quietly weathered. "They tried to erase you," she said one evening, "and you ended up in charge." It wasn't about revenge, I told her. It was about responsibility. Sometimes, when no one else steps up, you do because someone has to. And when you're that someone, the weight becomes a part of you. Helix Point had tried to replace me with flash and flare. But in the end, it was the boring guy with backups, logs, and a long memory who saved them. They hadn't just underestimated me, they'd misread the entire blueprint. Now I was redrawing it in real time. Brandon Shaw eventually pled guilty and took a deal. He'll serve time, but less than he deserves. Daniel fought the charges and lost. Jason fled the country, but federal charges ensured he wouldn't stay comfortable for long. Robert Chun stayed on his board chair longer than he planned, just to see the cleanup through. We met monthly, sometimes over lunch, sometimes over incident reports. He trusted me now, not just with systems, but with silence. The kind of silence that means you don't have to explain everything, just show up and deliver. There were still challenges, new threats, new compliance demands, budget fights, but they didn't rattle me. When you've survived a collapse, turbulence feels like weather. You learn to move with it, not panic in it. And you never forget who tried to push you off the ladder when the building started to shake. 6 months after I took the role, the board approved my proposal to launch a new program, Legacy Integration. It sounded like tech jargon, but it was something more human. We paired retiring engineers with rising talent for mentorship before knowledge was lost to retirement or layoffs. It honored people like me, the ones who'd been overlooked too many times. At our first event, I spoke in front of the whole company, something I'd never done in 17 years. I used to think loyalty meant staying quiet, I told them. But now I know it means speaking up when something's wrong. It means doing the hard thing even when no one notices. It means protecting the people who come next. The applause was long, maybe longer than I deserved. But I didn't flinch, didn't shrink. I stood there, grounded by everything I'd endured. Because truthfully, I was no longer standing for myself, I was standing for all the quiet workers who made companies run while others claimed the glory. That winter, Helix Point's annual report included a full-page feature about our transformation. I wasn't the headline, but I was in the detail: system upgrades, cultural audits, incident response overhaul. My name was on every chart, even if only in metadata. Tina framed the article and hung it above my desk. "Not bad for someone they called outdated," she said, grinning. I laughed. But part of me still remembered the hallway that day, Daniel's stare, Amanda's silence, the weight of the box in my arms. I never wanted to be executive. I wanted to be essential. And somewhere along the line, I learned that those two things weren't opposites. When done right, they were the same. One snowy morning, a younger engineer, Maya, stopped me in the hall. "You probably don't remember," she said, "but 3 years ago you fixed my first deployment when it broke in production. I was terrified. You stayed after hours to help me debug it without making me feel small." I remembered. Not her name, but the problem, the crash caused by a missed semicolon in a shell script. We'd laughed about it once the system stabilized. "You taught me that being right isn't the same as making someone feel wrong," she said. I've never forgotten that. Those were the moments that mattered. Not board votes or titles or news stories, but small interactions where someone walks away believing in themselves because you saw them. That's how culture changes, one act of mercy at a time. Eventually, the noise faded. The company stopped buzzing with my story and went back to just doing the work. That's how I knew things were finally stable. When I wasn't news, I was normal. At home, Tina noticed the change before I did. "You breathe easier now," she said. "You don't carry your shoulders so tight. You sleep through the night. I think you finally put the fire out." I looked at her, eyes soft. "The fire never goes out," I said. "It just finds a fireplace. And sometimes, that's all we need, somewhere safe to burn. Somewhere we can turn heat into light." One afternoon in early spring, I walked past the building's glass facade and caught my reflection. Older, grayer, yes, but calm. Confident. Complete. It was the first time I looked at myself and didn't feel like a man trying to prove something. I stepped into the lobby as 2 new hires checked in with reception. They looked nervous, underdressed, unsure of what lay ahead. I remembered that feeling, the edge of uncertainty. So I stopped and said, "You're in the right place. Just keep your head down and your backups clean." They laughed, unsure if I was serious. "Thanks," one said, then added, "You work here." I smiled. Something like that. And walked away knowing they didn't need the whole story, just a piece. That night, Tina and I sat on the porch again, same as we did the evening after I'd been fired. Only this time there was no beer, no silence. Just peace. The kind that follows a storm that tried to undo you. "I never thought I'd see the day," she said, sipping her tea, "where they not only let you back in, but let you lead." "I didn't either," I replied. "But that's the thing about bridges, they don't just burn. Sometimes they hold. And when they do, when they hold through fire, collapse, and everything in between, they become stronger than steel." I had walked back across the same ground that once pushed me out, not to take revenge, but to build something better, brick by brick, truth by truth. No one saw it coming, and that was the point. The quiet man had rebuilt the castle from beneath its foundation without making a sound.